From Software has created a series of games that have been defined by the quality of their boss fights and world. Think of the internet outcry and triumph for Radon both times, really. Or having the perfectly placed skill check in Sekiro like Genichiro. From Software has iterated on this basic formula since 2009. Demon's Souls was released to universal acclaim and is an absolute classic, but you rarely find many of the bosses on any of the best boss lists in general or in the Soulsborne games as a whole. Now that doesn't mean they aren't interesting or fun or cool or memorable. The puzzle and problem solving of these fights has allowed From Software to further experiment and iterate and improve upon them. Maiden Estrella has an incredibly interesting and tragic lore, discovering the truth about her god's existence or lack thereof, or lack of caring for the people, so she basically accepts the soul of a demon and attempts to help the people in a very, very warped way. Old King Allant might sneak on the list here and there, but the fight can feel dated at times compared to modern Souls. The same can even be said about a lot of the bosses in Dark Souls 1. The gargoyles used to be a massive skill check for people, with an insane amount of people just really quitting the game at this point, and where they're now considered simple. The Four Kings barely has a boss arena. It's like, I understand that, they ran out of money developing and everything, but they just didn't do anything with the Four Kings. Pinwheel is this incredibly interesting concept for a boss, but then they just explode as soon as you get down there. Now, a lot of these concepts and ideas are visible in a lot of these fights, and they eventually bear fruit down the road. So think Priscilla's invisibility mechanics are the foundation for what would eventually become one of the best fights in the Souls series with Sister Fried. The Gaping Dragon can stun himself into a wall, just like the Falling Star Beast can stun itself in nightreign. I'm working on modding Dark Souls to never fight Sif, but it's also really hard not to see the similarities with the Red Wolf of Radagon, becoming just a faster, more exaggerated dodge and moveset versus Sif. Ornstein and Smo are iconic and have aged well, but it's still a simple fight mechanically. And I think From Software has struggled with gank bosses at times, but I actually think the balance and the pacing and movesets of this fight helped evolve more into the Twin Princes, which is less typically thought of as a gank fight, but I think it's a well-iterated tangent that balances varying movesets and enemies incredibly well. Now, these all pale in comparison to the impact of the most important boss in the Souls series, Artorias the Abyss Walker. Now, why is he the most important boss in the series? As I don't think he's the best, but really, Artorias is the template for the most memorable boss fights in the entire series. His DNA is littered in every one of your favorite humanoid fights. Artorias sets the stage for the Fume Knight, for Pontiff, for the Soul of Cinder, Gale, Godfrey, Melania, Mesber, on and on. Every one of those bosses where you look at and you're like, this is cool, this is fun, this is balanced, this is intense. They can all be tied to Artorias. So why though? Really, he's the first boss in the series that truly feels to have a varied moveset. He'll close the distance on you with Lion's Claw and his charge attack. He'll catch you in a roll with his backhand slash. He'll go Super Saiyan and blow you up. He's also really the first humanoid fight that greatly punishes your positioning and actions. Way back in the day, internet communities would even accuse Artorias of input reading because they'd get smashed every time they reached for a flask. And the beauty of this design is that even though these combos are relatively simple, they are varied and offer plenty of counterplay. Artorias felt like one of the first bosses that you could truly master, not in a cheese or parry way, but in a get-good way. Artorias' design also feels unique and really has become iconic in the series. I mean, you even have skins of him in nightreign, and Wilder's basically designed off of Artorias. No one looks back at the games in Dark Souls 1 or the different bosses, and you see the Taurus Demon or the Ceaseless Discharge and think that, you know what? These designs are iconic. We need to go back to that. Although really with a name like the Ceaseless Discharge, that fight should have been much more memorable in at least one way. Now think of every boss that is heavily inspired by Artorias that I listed above. They all share a common DNA in their origin, but they are all still so distinct and memorable. When the foundation is superb, it really allows everything to fall into place and for creativity to shine as opposed to creating the template. And I actually think that's why these games as a whole have been so excellent in general, as they have constantly iterated and progressed the formula forward. Each game is distinct and feels different and allows for variations like Sekiro and Bloodborne that are wholly unique and independent, but still obviously related. And I think this series of games would have been so drastically different if they would have been trying to reinvent the wheel over and over again. I also think that's kind of an interesting aside to the modern legacy of Final Fantasy, which is so drastically different from game to game, which is one of the reasons why the internet discourse and discussions on people can get so negative on it. But I'm not a doomer. I love all these games, and it's just different. So don't catch me with any of that negativity. That's a different video. That's a different discussion. Back to Artorias. Let's not make this more complicated than it has to be, though. Artorias was really the first really effing cool boss in the series. I already listed his design and fight being so important, but he's just really cool. Like, hey, I'm this legendary human that sacrificed myself to save my dog. Do you know how easy it is to rally around that? You're like, yeah, I love pets. I have a dog. I would do that. Everybody can just instantly be like, hey, yep, cool. I want to know more about this guy. Also, I have a huge sword. Without doing any other things that make him great, you would already have a fan base based off of this. I'm not even going into the lore, but his lore permeates the rest of Dark Souls. And it might seem really silly, but it distinctly matters that he was cool. In the base game, there are only arguments for maybe a couple bosses being really cool. Gwyn, based off the design, lore, arena, music, it's very memorable. Ornstein and Smo for the designs, and for really being the first toughest boss in the series. And then maybe Nido, based off design, or Quelaag for entirely different reasons. For Artorias, it's Lion's Claw. Well, this rules. Broken arm with a big sword? Yeah, I can get behind that. It's simple. And without him, there would be no Gale, who I think is the best boss in all of Dark Souls, and the most fitting conclusion to a trilogy of games there ever could be, both thematically and lore and gameplay. Anyway, I'm rambling. Let me know who you think is the most important boss in the series and who is your favorite. Hope you enjoyed, and don't you dare go hollow.